Well, good afternoon once again, and thank you all for joining us. I think we'll get ourselves going. It's great to see, again, such a tremendous audience. A few more people still arriving, but I'm sure they'll catch up with us as we move forward. As you know, we have a short 45-minute session here for you today, and we'll ensure that we get you out on time. So in any case, great, and thank you. I think Chris, one of our presenters, is controlling the slides, so perhaps, Chris, we could just slide up to the next one. So maybe I'll just start off by saying that I'll preface the session by saying that even though advanced cyber attack detection tools and sophisticated protection processes these days have come as far as they have, it's still not a matter, though, of if you will get breached by a cyber attack. It's a question of when. And with that happy opening statement, I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for joining R2i and IBM this afternoon for our discussion about IT infrastructure cyber resiliency, ransomware, and data recovery. These are topics that I'm sure are front of mind for many of you during these turbulent times. My name is Roger Osmond, and I am the General Manager for the R2i Ontario Division and will be your host today. I have spent over 35 years in the IT industry, the first 15 at IBM, and then in various sales and business leadership roles within Canadian solution providers, including the last year and a half here at R2i. Joining me today from IBM as our featured presenter is Chris Vollmar. Chris is an IBM worldwide storage data resiliency architect. He is focused on helping customers design solutions to support cyber resiliency on primary and backup data to complement their cybersecurity practices. He is also an author of several IBM Redbooks on hybrid cloud, metadata management, and software-defined storage solutions. He is also an enterprise design thinking co-creator, whatever that means. Perhaps, Chris, you can tell us what that means later, and a frequent speaker at technology events, including IBM Technical University. Also joining Chris today in our expert panel and question and answer session that will conclude our session is Costa Makropoulos. Costa is a client technical storage solution specialist here with IBM Canada. Tao Tudi, a partner storage technical leader here with IBM, and John Haynes, senior solution architect here at R2i. So just thinking about the quick agenda ahead of us here, following my short introduction of R2i, Chris will update us on the importance of cyber resiliency as a complement to a cybersecurity strategy. He'll talk about key approaches to defend and recover data in the event of a breach. He'll talk about cyber resiliency framework against which we can assess and compare your own IT infrastructure. We'll look at best practices and some next steps to help incorporate some of these best practices into your own IT infrastructure. And lastly, we'll open it up for some questions and discussions with our expert roundtable. Throughout the session, please feel free to enter any questions you may have in the chat or raise your hand. And then certainly at the end during the question and answer session and the expert roundtable, we can open up mics even for live discussion as well. So looking forward to all of that. So just to get going, next chart, please, Chris. Many of you I know already know R2i, but perhaps some do not. So firstly, R2i. The R in R2i stands for resources and speaks to the highly skilled technical and sales professional that we have on staff who average about 25 years or more of experience in the IT industry. The two I's stand for infrastructure and integration. Infrastructure being our traditional focus and strength that we've built our core around, and integration meaning kind of the integration and evolution of working with our clients and having them involved in our various managed services as well as our R2i public cloud offerings. So who exactly is R2i? Next chart, please, Chris. R2i was founded in Montreal in 2014 and has grown to over 40 employees with offices in Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto. R2i has been recognized as one of Canada's fastest growing IT companies for the last 4 years, and our success has been rewarded with multiple business and technology awards from organizations and associations across the country. We're exceptionally proud of our 4 R2i cloud data centers, all of which are SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, and they support our public and hybrid cloud offerings, 2 of which are in the Montreal area, synchronous to one another, and 2 others in the Greater Toronto area, synchronous themselves, and then asynchronous between Montreal and Toronto. R2i is also a leader in ISO compliancy, and we hold certifications in 7001, 27017, 27018 that speak to data security, privacy, etc. And we support our R2i cloud and on-prem managed services customers with our Montreal-based, completely Canadian-owned and operated network operating system, operating center that runs 724, 365 days a year. So just a little bit more about us and our focus on the next chart here. At R2i, we focus on data center, IT infrastructure, cloud computing, digital transformation, artificial intelligence, and IT managed services. Our historical IT infrastructure focus includes servers, storage and networking, virtualized, hyperconverged, disaster recovery, high availability solutions, just to name a few. We help clients move to public, private, and hybrid clouds, modernize and transform their applications, and move them along in a journey towards harnessing artificial intelligence to optimize their businesses. And lastly, our consulting services, our 724 managed services and cloud offerings are all Canadian-based, as I mentioned, and supporting by our team of highly experienced and skilled team of technical professionals. And we do all of this on the next chart by partnering with industry-leading vendors such as IBM, where we're extremely proud to hold the coveted platinum partner status and only one of a few in Canada to be able to do so. So very short R2i introduction to kick things off. I appreciate you allowing me to do that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris for a closer look at our IT cyber resiliency main discussion today. Thanks, everyone.
And thanks, Roger. To your question, IBM has a very well-defined and kind of somewhat publicized practice around design thinking, or enterprise design thinking, as we call it. There are a couple of different levels around the practice, and to your question, the co-creation is one of those ones where you've gone through a bunch of design thinking, you've coached teams now, and you started to work with clients and deliver kind of a co-created product. So whether that be an MVP, whether that be a process design, kind of all of those fit inside that design thinking practice. So one of my, those of you who know me will know I've got a lot of sort of side things going inside IBM. I keep a lot of fingers in a lot of pies. Design thinking is one of the ones I enjoy the most because I think it is a great chance for us to work together with our clients to kind of create and innovate with them collaboratively. So design thinking, one of my passions, and certainly something I thoroughly enjoy.
Well, thanks, Chris. Now we know. Appreciate that.
There you go. And we do these kind of things, and frankly, we use design thinking inside our ransomware and cyber resiliency practices as well. So some of the stuff that we'll talk about today, these are absolutely parts of the practice that we can work with, where it is very much let's understand what we're dealing with, and then let's work together with the nuances of an environment, the nuances of one of our clients, to then co-create the right fit for them in some cases. Sometimes it's as simple as just reinvigorating or reinterpreting practice and building new. Sometimes it's as simple, or sometimes it's more complex, like building a new MVP around something. A minimum viable product is the term we generally use, and I've done that with in AI tooling, and we've also done some stuff around that with cyber resiliency. And then to Roger's point is, as we talk about cyber resiliency and data recovery, absolutely, I would say, why is cyber resiliency important? Well, as Roger kind of alluded to, what's in the headlines? There continues to be an ongoing discussion around ransomware. There continues to be new innovation around ransomware. If you haven't seen it, by the way, IBM X-Force produces a threat report every year. It is absolutely interesting reading. It also highlights a lot of the challenges around what we're seeing in ransomware, how prolific ransomware is in an attack. Here you got an example of some of the ones that have popped up over 2021. There has already been lots of news in 2022 around them. But this also starts to illuminate some of the concerns. And to Roger's point, it can very much be a when not if scenario because of the sheer numbers of attacks, and we can only work on the reports that are publicized. And when you have the reports that are publicized, you also have clients that are able to kind of share some data around, well, how long did it take to recover? And that's one of the first things that is a concern whenever wherever we're looking at something like this. Is the market average from what we're seeing is 23 days to do a recovery from a ransomware or a cyber incident. That can very much mean only parts of the business are offline. That can also mean large amounts of the business are offline, and then that will also lead to the impact of being offline that long. Those of you who are living in the GTA, the Greater Toronto area, probably been seeing some of the news. There's been a couple of prolific cyber-related incidents in the last 4 or 5 months. One even 2 weeks ago that was catching lots of attention. The impact, I think, is, at least of that one we were watching or seeing in the news last week, very much noticed around the cost impact. And I haven't seen it assessed yet, but I can only imagine that it'll fit somewhere in the neighborhood of what we're seeing as the average of over $5 million cost to a business that's been hit. The other things that we're seeing in a market-wise perspective, which coming out of some of the survey data and some of the self-reporting data we're seeing, is there's a high propensity for clients to want to pay. In the past, and there's been some ones in Canada that have been pretty prolific about agreeing to pay and how much. There was one 4 or 5 years ago, a university was able to escape from a ransomware attack with a $20,000 payment. Those numbers have escalated dramatically. So whereas I might have set aside budget in the past, or we might have thought about that, the cost has gone up. So whether that continues to be a pay and get out scheme, possibility that's a viable, or has been in the past, a viable option. I'm not convinced it will be in the future. There's also a fair bit of, based on some of the articles and published studies, there's also an impact to the business even on that payment structure, where if I go to sort of pay my way out of the challenge, the CFO, there's a few things the CFO wants to pay attention to, and some of that turns into different insurance premiums. Some of that turns into higher borrowing costs. The bigger ones are obvious around brand damage. Also having to protect if data has been exposed or extrapolated and then rebroadcast or sold off. That leads into lawsuits, that leads into supporting other things. So there's certainly a series of costs that all come along with it. And it's not as simple as always as pay and you get out. And this is kind of the concern I generally have around the idea of, well, I might be able to get my way out of here. As you sort of see the animation come through, the idea of recovery and remittance of payment to get out. There's a couple of studies that I think caught my attention that I've got here for us. One around the ability to actually recover data if you've paid the ransom. There are some cases that not all of the data came back, only part of the data came back. Some of the data came back. It doesn't look like all of the data has come back based on your loss. So it starts to become, well, what data did I lose, or what was unrecoverable? The other concern or consideration we've seen sort of escalating through 2021, a little bit at the end of 2020, more in 2021 and 2022, is you'll see here is that there's been based on a Marsh report, there's been a dramatic acceleration in the cost of cyber insurance. And cyber insurance has absolutely been a consideration for a lot of our clients. The premiums have gone up, as have some of the requirements have gone up. And there's been some really interesting articles around recent judgments in the United States that have changed a lot of the cyber insurance, I'd say cyber insurance requirements to meet compliance, and also some of the impact around what's the potential and where those insurance companies may no longer have to pay. There's one in specific caught my attention about 6 weeks ago, maybe 8 weeks ago, in that one lawsuit, and it was federal court in New Jersey, if I remember correctly, had talked about, if you amended the active war subheading and structure inside of your cyber insurance, or if the company had amended it in their cyber insurance policy, they wouldn't have had to pay. The concern is that once that judgment came out, a lot of the cyber insurance changed its wording to not have to pay out based on active war or deeming something as an active war. Why is that particularly troublesome for us? Well, there's kind of two reasons here that I draw out both of these examples. One, ransomware payment remittance is dependent upon being able to get the data back. Two, there's the change in types of attack we're seeing and a shift. So what we have generally experienced the last 3 years, we've seen mostly commercial grade. And that's what most of our defenses have been built around, has been commercial grade. There has been a change over the last little while, and it's been accelerated in the last 63 days to see more military grade style attacks. Those military grade style attacks are different. And one of the biggest differences is they are not designed to extort money in return for potentially giving your data back. The goal of them is to be destructive. You'll be able to do some searching. IBM X-Force actually lists some of them. The ones you can, if you want to Google them on the IBM X-Force site, look at things like hermetic wiperware, Isaac wiperware. There's been a couple other wiperwares that X-Force has publicized as well and has found. Those are all military grade style driven ransomware or malware tooling that is meant to wipe out the data. It may mimic, it may look like, and it may even give you a screen that says, hey, if you enter some money, we'll give you your information back. At the end of the day, however, it's not giving the data back. It's wiped that data. It's either completely corrupted table headers that you can't get back, or in some really scary cases, it's even I've even seen reports of kind of burning or impacting the boot drive or the master boot records on the laptop or on the server, where it's kind of, you've kind of destroyed the system, for lack of a better way to put it. I'll call it burnt. Some of that military grade is also AI infused. The difference here is we've been reactive for the last number of years. That as threat actors create new ways of doing things, we countermeasure. The issue here is that the countermeasures are getting harder and harder to make because the level and type of attack is getting harder and harder. Have we seen this before? Yes. And as a lot of us who follow the news, you'll see SolarWinds mentioned here. The consideration, however, is if you see a rise, as we see a rise in military grade attacks, the real challenge becomes, one, data may not be recoverable, period, because it's been burnt. Two, because it would be considered an act of war, you may not see insurance be able to pay it based on requirements. And three, spillover. And this is the one that I have the most concern about. Is we've seen in the past situations, and I think NotPetya was a good example, where it was a nation state driven attack that targeted one space, but then spilled over and impacted a global set of industries. And that's probably the biggest concern here, is even if it is targeted one place, it may spill over. And then if it doesn't have a switch off mechanism already written in, and some people may not want to actually put one in, it could very well be spilling over into a whole bunch of other industries, into trading partners we work with, into partners we're linked to, into other companies we work with. And then you start to see a proliferation of it and then the impact from it. So as we kind of look at all of these threats, I like to draw the distinction between cybersecurity and cyber resiliency. Cybersecurity is absolutely something we keep doing and we need to keep doing. It is, all of the tooling practices and procedures we've been building for years around keeping threat actors out of our environments and catching threat actors when they sneak through our environments. Now, I draw the distinction because that is different than cyber resiliency. And we'd argue in our case that cyber resiliency is the ability to come back. So I look at these two very much in tandem, is how I look at it from an architectural point of view. Is I'm absolutely keeping the bad guys out. I'm absolutely keeping the threat actors, and I'm trying to catch them if they sneak through. However, the numbers tell me they're going to get through because they're going to invent new things that maybe I don't have countermeasures for. How do I recover from something if a ransomware attack, a malware attack, some sort of corrupting agent has been deployed inside the environment? Well, that's my cyber resiliency posture. That's my processes, procedures, tooling I want to think about to build a cyber resilient infrastructure. And I would also say that is different from our traditional business continuity and disaster recovery planning. We all have business continuity and recovery plans. We all have run books. We all have build books, and we all have technology we use to support those. But that is different than how I would build my cyber resiliency structures. I believe that we're going to be able to reuse a lot of those practices. Touching kind of this example here, practices and tooling will overlap from disaster recovery to cyber resiliency to business continuity. However, disaster recovery does not give me the ability to be cyber resilient at the same time. There are a whole set of other considerations I want to try to map out as I'm building that practice and that thought, and how I want to be able to come back in the event of an incident. A couple simple examples. If I got hit with a ransomware, if we were hit with a malware attack and data is corrupted, well, if I'm synchronous or asynchronous, really replicating my data from site A to site B, I have probably and almost assuredly replicated the data corruption as soon as it's happened or within seconds to minutes of when it's happened. So if I haven't detected that immediately, I've probably got corrupt data from site A has now propagated to site B, because at the end of the day, we're replicating bad bits. A bad bit is a bit, and that bit gets replicated. So now I'm locked on both sides. Where that becomes an issue is most of my DR and business continuity procedures are generally built around, well, if primary site's offline, I'm going to roll to DR. I might have some snapshots to recover from. I might have some data to recover from. I might have a crash consistent copy to recover from, and the idea of a global mirror, except those are probably all corrupted as well. So even if I brought it back up, I could be reintroducing a piece of malware, or I could just be in as bad a shape as I was on the primary site at my DR. So I need to think about how I build other practices. And then the other example I'll draw out is the bad actors have figured out, based on years of attacking us, that backup is a great target. And we've seen examples where the bad actors will step in, try to blow away my backup environment. I've seen it successfully happen where they've wiped out a backup environment, and then deployed their ransomware malware. So even if I've got good backups, or even if I manage to protect my backups, I also have another problem. How do I do a mass restore? In my HA and DR, I'm used to be able to restore a bad file, a deleted. Hey, a developer knocked off a couple of files. Can I go back in and pull them back? Yes. Hey, I do my nightly backups. They might be incremental forever. They might be fulls every week, but then I'm 6 or 7 days back. Also, have I tried to restore my most critical applications all at once to an environment to come back up? Because I might still be working off my RTO or RPO of 4 or 5 hours based on what the business thought for DR. Those challenges kind of set us aside from traditional disaster recovery and business continuity practices. And also on the backup side, we're generally rigged for large amounts of backup, but not always large amounts of mass restore at once. How do I bring back my most critical apps? Now, may not be 300 like the slide here, but you certainly have the challenge of how do I restore in mass, or how do I restore clean copies of the data? So what we've been working on in IBM Storage has been, how do we improve our recovery posture? How do I build my cyber resiliency by building up my recovery posture? And in the example here, that's being very logarithmic in this chart, you'll sort of see the example of detect, respond, and then recover. And this very much fits with that 23-day to 2-week kind of period that we've seen enough public reports around. That tends to be the option. And I might take a long time to detect the breach. I might start my response within 2 hours. It might take longer. And then my recovery can be, as I've got here, very long. So we've been working on something called Cyber Vault. And inside Cyber Vault, or inside the idea of Cyber Vault, is the ability to improve within hours, recover within hours, and not days, or recover quicker than before. And as my animation seems to have all of a sudden stopped working, there we go. You'll start to see we try to bring that curve forward. We try to bring that recovery point forward. So I'm trying to bring forward the ability to recover in hours, not days, or in days, not weeks, depending on what I'm dealing with. So for us, Cyber Vault is very much a practice and a set of blueprints to be able to leverage a bunch of technology and improve my recovery posture and improve my cyber resiliency posture. So to do that, we build on top of something called IBM Safeguarded Copy. This is something we've been working with on the mainframe for a number of years and have brought it into open systems for over a year now, or coming on a year now. It allows me to take on system, so on my production storage system, immutable protected copies that are not available to everyone and are not visible to everyone. So they sit in an immutable structure, and I'm going to build a policy schedule around them. So I can take copies from 6 and 9 and 12 and say 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock at night. I've gone through my day. I've got 4 or 5 copies. No one else can see them, but they're on my storage subsystem. And then on my way home, you might get the alert of, hey, we've got a corruption. It might be a ransomware attack. We've got a problem. Well, my production data is probably no longer usable. However, I've got the ability to start checking those at point in time copies, and they're crash consistent copies. So I can check those point in time crash consistent copies before I would bring them back. So what I will generally do is have a separate environment. I'll mount my LUN, check the LUNs, start to see if the data is clean. So I might do a rollback. I might, check my tables, use my Oracle recovery tools, check the first copy. First copy may not be good. Move back a copy. That one may not be good. I can start to work my way back through my copy sets until I find a clean version of the data that I want to use. And then I can bring that back into production. This saves me a bunch of things. It saves me having to hop through backup networks. It also gives me more point in times than I would have had in backup. It saves the restore time from a backup into the production system and then the testing time, because I can do all of this on the subsystem and on the primary system or on my DR system, however I want to position it. But it allows me to then take these copies. Now, the point about these being immutable and protected means that if the threat actors gain access to the system, or if I have internal threat actors, based on kind of policy procedure, they wouldn't be able to action this. And I can set up a structure where more than one has to agree to say, delete these or bring these back in. So I've got the ability to control who's got access to the copies and when I want to invoke them. That way, I've got the ability to also then go and do some sort of data validation and forensic analysis before I promote back into production, if that's the appropriate thing for me. So we build our Cyber Vault on top of the safeguarded copy. And this works really good. Now, what I like around being able to move to Cyber Vault is I can take the technology in terms of safeguarded copy, and I can build some process procedure around it where I start to build that automation and create the automation around it so that I can improve my recovery time beyond just I have copies on the system. Now I can, how do I automate some of that structure? So at the beginning, in the idea of a Cyber Vault, I'll absolutely protect the data, leveraging safeguarded copies. Those are my policy-driven immutable snapshots. I tend to want to build the vault now. So that vault gives me a place to recover. I think about, building maybe some test VMs, an isolated room. I used to use the term clean room, but then I also want to build some proactive monitoring around it as well. Now that could be integration with your SIEM tool, your security and emergency response management tool. It could be IBM QRadar, could be others. So you could build the integration if you want to. You could do integration with IBM Storage Insights as well around early detection of a dramatic pattern change in your storage environment. Then I want to build my testing process. I want to think about how I want to test data and validate it, use my forensic tools. Databases have some of their own tooling. Each application probably has something in its tool suite. So I want to think about how I would create that. Some of this is to Roger's earlier question, I would do in design thinking around, well, what's my recovery plan? How's the best way to optimize that? How many different tool sets and processes and stuff would I want to put into my run book? So I've got a nice standardized process, create my plan, validate my plan, and then schedule time that I'm doing it on a regular basis. So I'm constantly checking and it's becoming part of muscle memory for me and isn't something that I'm doing kind of in a high stress, high pressure time with a whole lot of coffee at 2 in the morning, because nobody likes those. And then how do I automate it? So for my perspective, once we get to that state, how do I want to automate as much as I can? And then if I can do that automation, well, do I want to be checking every day? Maybe I want to check one of my copies every day to make sure they're clean. Maybe I want to check a couple copies every day so I know that they're clean, because then if something does happen, I've already got a pre-validated copy. And there's ways to automate that. We've got some clients that have already done it with a variety of things like MongoDB as an example. But they're doing a constant iterative checking of the data sets. This is clean, this is clean, this is clean. So if anything actually happens, it becomes very simple to roll back into production with a pre-validated copy. Now, this is something you're going to get to day one. This is something, how do I start and move up? So I like the idea of kind of build my capacity or my structure around safeguarded copy, and then start to build my tools on top. And sort of see, as you see this slide is built up, how do I start to build my process procedure to get to kind of my overall Cyber Vault design? One comment I'll make is, as we're looking on IBM Flash system, there's lots of places I want to do it as well. I've got clients that are doing it on their production environment inside their production facility. I've got other clients that are doing it in their production facility, and they're sending, or actually rather, they're sending a copy to their DR facility, and that's where they're building their Cyber Vault. So it all comes down to what's my physical, what's my virtual isolation, what are my preferences, how do I want to do this, and what makes sense for my business. Another thing that, to Roger's point, maybe I would do in a design thinking discussion around, well, what makes sense? Do I want to put it on my production environment? Would I build this in my DR environment? Because I might have some extra VM cycles or some extra LPAR cycles that I could work with that I could then use as part of my testing process, or target long-term for my testing process and build my vault around, so that I could then eventually get to that level of automation where it's always happening in my DR facility. Do I do it on both? Lots of options around how I want to do it, but I've got the flexibility to design the process that makes sense. So for us around immutable copies and Cyber Vault, it is, I start with my immutable copies. I build a process around some proactive monitoring. We build our process around test and validation of the copies. and then it lets me to do automation and rapid recovery. So I want to think about different ways that I can leverage these pieces and start to build them up. Now, I don't need to go, like I said, all at once. I start to want to think about how do I build them maybe in iterative steps as I kind of build out the practice. And the first place I usually say is let's start with building those immutable copies. Let's make sure we have a clean copy of the data that we can always work from, and that you're comfortable in your procedures about how you would test them. I was actually working with a client this morning around, step one, let's build out our immutable copies, and let's test how your team is going to work with Oracle in their case, work with a crash consistent copy and make sure that there's a comfortable procedure. We can do that with either the first safeguarded copies you take, or we could do that with just a straight flash copy, test our process, then apply the process into our recovery procedures to start to build our run book and our procedure book from there. And then down the road, for them, their slightly longer term vision will be automation. But the first is build my process, build my validation structures, and start to put those pins in place. So we build flash a safeguarded copy on top of the IBM flash system family. And, as you probably heard earlier this year, we had a pretty large set of announcements that expanded the family and kind of gave us the next iteration of our platform family, all based on NVMe, all leveraging IBM Flash Core modules as an option. By and large, it's the option we see across Canada being used the most, is the NVMe IBM Flash Core modules that power the flash system, so the flash system 5200. And you sort of see this step up in terms of physical footprint and capability. So we'll go from a 1U 5200 to a 2U 7300 to a 4U 9500. All of these high performance, low latency response time, and have the ability to deliver the CyberVault capability or the safeguarded copies that lead me to CyberVault capabilities. And as part of the latest code drop, you'll also see we've got the ability to do multi-factor authentication on all the systems. And as you get to the 95, you'll see some other additional security features we've started to build in. But these can form the basis for either my production site CyberVault or my DR CyberVault practice. However I want to build my safeguarded copies, I've got the ability to do it across the IBM flash system, NVMe-based family, the 5200, the 7300, and the 9500. So we had a little bit of brainstorming, not entirely in the form of design thinking, but we had a little bit of brainstorming earlier this week and late last week. And Tao was giving us some ideas. So I'm going to give a little shout out to Tao, who's part of our expert panel today. What are some of the ways I could protect my data? What are some of the different things I would use? I would use safeguarded copy and CyberVault, absolutely. But let me think, big picture about what are different techniques. And Chris, does safeguarded copy fit for all data was a really good question we had. Well, I'd like to say that not everything is something I would use safeguarded copy for. I would use safeguarded copy for probably my most important ones. I refer to them as my minimum viable company, my MVC. And that's probably the hottest, most transactional data, the stuff that's changing regularly. But I also want to think about some of my long-term data sets. In healthcare, that might be patient records or x-rays. In oil exploration, that might very well be my seismic data that is federally regulated and might not change, but I have to keep for an extended amount of time. In other industries, there's other types of data that has to be kept for a long time, but isn't necessarily changing. So I want to think about how do I protect that data? I also want to think about how I protect the stuff that runs the business and runs my minimum viable company. So, as we got talking, and this is kind of very much the idea of, well, how do I want to address different types of data as I start to do my data classification, and which ones do I want to protect? So safeguarded copy, absolutely. Other ways to protect some of the longer term retention data that is more static, I want to think about that as a separate way. I want to look at a different procedure. I want to iterate differently there. In some cases, that physical air gap is very important. So if I need to build a physical air gap for maybe long-term retention, there's actually an approach using IBM tape that you can do. And we actually have seen a resurgence in a lot of tape architecture with our clients in the last 2 years as well. There's something called, or something we've termed safeguarded tape, where it's the ability to create a logical partition inside the library. Leverage that logical partition to set a second copy of my tapes aside. And that partition might be completely gapped. So I may have a logical air gap inside the library versus having to ever take tapes out. I could set aside that logical partition, archive my tapes in the same library, and still be able to be separate from the tapes I'm working with day to day. So that starts to create a safeguarded area that protects those tapes from my day-to-day work. So I've created an air gap inside, and that's probably very applicable for things that are, tape-based ISVs or ISVs that support tape, or IBM technologies like IBM Spectrum Protect or IBM Spectrum Archive. And the point I'll make around the 4300 is, I think I said small but mighty. It starts at 3U and can carry about 720 terabytes of data before compression. So I can carry a pretty big load of data that's archivable, and still have the ability to recover from it in a nice small form factor. As we got talking, Tao had another conversation for us, and we agreed that logical air gap, something I do with IBM safeguarded copy, makes sense. So in the example of a 5200, I might have my production LUNs, and I'll also have some of my safeguarded copy LUNs. You'll see with the little lock sign on them. So where does it make sense to locate them? That's my biggest question, because is it on my production facility? Is it my DR facility? Is it both? What's the right approach? Some of that comes from, how do I customize? How do I iterate that makes sense for the business? But I could start by just doing my logical air gap, start by doing safeguarded copy on my most critical data, my minimum viable company data, and kind of move from there. So I don't necessarily need to have a big system to do it. With the size and capacity we're getting on the IBM FlashCore modules, I've got the ability to pack a lot of capacity into a small area, and I can keep a good healthy number of copies as I go through. And then what's the automated recovery? How do I get to that next step? What's maybe the end goal is building that automated recovery with IBM Cyber Vault, where I'll start with immutable copies, and then I'll work to a proactive monitoring structure. Maybe Storage Insights makes good sense there. Build my Cyber Vault area so I can test and validate copies, and then be able to restore them, in an automated fashion if I kind of get to the end goal. But I want to build on the process, start to iterate and add to that process as well. But in that idea of the automated recovery, I probably have an automated environment that I test my data in to make sure it's clean. And the biggest question we see a lot of our clients talking through today is, well, where do I start overall? Those are some good patterns, Chris, and especially Tao. Those are some great patterns. Where, if I want to get a real handle on stuff, how do I start to put my head wrapped around what are my right priorities? How do I pick off the right places to start? Well, there's actually something we've been doing for over a year now called the IBM Cyber Resiliency Assessment tool. So inside IBM, we love acronyms, and this one came out as the CRAT. It gives us the ability to spend probably a good 2-hour discussion with you as our clients. In that discussion, we're going to ask a whole lot of questions, but they're very pointed questions, and we hope to be efficient with them, because what it does help us do is build out a few things. One, a nice deliverable with a scoring structure. You sort of see some of it here today, and I base it around the NIST framework. And that NIST framework is obviously something not IBM specific, so we're trying to align to the market and to the individual standards organization. So we leverage the NIST framework. We build our question structures around there. And then from there, I'm able to understand scoring. So am I strong in recovery, but not as strong in detection? Do I need some work on both of those areas? The scoring tends to help us see that. We do get a good view of our state of as we are through some of the graphing that'll come with the report. But most importantly, it also helps us build out a set of major and minor recommendations and prioritizes them. And those are ones that are absolutely, say, not technology specific, but they're around, hey, we'd like you to look at things like air gapping and logical and physical, backup procedures, detection procedures. And they are sort of, I'll say they're vendor agnostic. So you're able to use these priorities and go, these make sense for me. Some of these make great sense. Helps me start to figure out, well, what do I want to put priorities around? And then, we're happy to help you with where some of the IBM technology would fit there, but it isn't going to be technology specific to any of the recommendations. This is something we do for free with our clients. I actually have some of the team that I work with is doing one for a client right now. And after the 2 hours, within about 5 to 7 days, we'll have a report for you, and we'll walk you through the report and love to get some of your feedback from it as well. And it has turned into a very I have a number of customers come back and say this is a very helpful process to go through, because it helps orient some of the conversation, and sometimes it helps actually build some good process and procedure between teams as the conversation evolves. So I think next up, Roger, we're moving to our roundtable, right?
Yeah, thanks so very much, Chris. Yeah, absolutely we are. And what a lot of information, a lot of food for thought. I was especially gained a lot from understanding how the cyber resiliency is really a complement, is different, but yet it complements the existing disaster recovery and business continuity approaches. So yeah, it's just a couple of minutes. We are running tight on time, but let's get to this. And perhaps I can just ask a general question. Maybe John and Tao could perhaps throw their thoughts into a question here. Where do you folks think organizations should start in their journey towards implementing full and proper cyber resiliency? Perhaps John can make a first comment to that.
Well, everybody's made the point. It's not if, but when. Just like practicing a fire drill, just like doing disaster recovery tests, you need to think about how you're going to respond to this before it happens to you. Assess your infrastructure from top to bottom. Again, the IBM CRAD is a good place to start with that. And identify areas of weaknesses and room for improvement, and put these features and functionality, which are not ubiquitous in the marketplace. It's really important to make that point. Put these cyber resiliency features and functionality at the top of the list when you start refreshing all of that infrastructure end to end.
Excellent. No, excellent point, John. Tao, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to actually chime in with the story of how CRAD actually came about, or came to sort of popularity. And it was initially designed by one of our CTSs for a single client. So it was probably in the retail industry or something, not far along that line. And that very client ended up recommending it to another company who was not necessarily an IBM shop. And that's why the whole thing turned out to be brand agnostic. So we don't just deal with IBM thing. We are making this assessment all about cyber resiliency, period, no matter who you choose behind it. And I think that the overarching element, because we've had so many of these conversations with our clients, is that these are questions that we didn't really ask a few years ago. And one of those is, I was attacked, now what? And an attack sort of meant the whole world was coming to a sort of an end. And now we're just sitting here, and this is what I feel like Chris was arguing most of the time. And I think that if you didn't get anything from the presentation, one thing is really important, that one, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And second, keep calm and recover. The whole of IBM portfolio's strategic design is about diluting this fear and making what, God forbid, will eventually happen just another day in the IT world. So that's one thing I wanted to echo out there.
Excellent. Tyler, sounds like that should be a t-shirt or a poster. Keep calm.
Oh yeah, I think I'm making a few, and then we're making some money out of that. All right, that's a good business opportunity.
Absolutely. No, excellent. Well, look, thanks to the comments for John and Tao. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I think maybe we better cut our expert panel short here. There have been no questions raised in the chat, but maybe, Chris, we could just move to the couple of closing charts here. So we talked a lot about the cyber resiliency assessment tool. I should say we actually did that internally at R2i, because as I've said, we have 4 data centers all holding mission critical information for our customers, a broad range of infrastructure setup. And we really enjoyed the process. We learned a lot out of it. I think we came off looking very good out of it, but at the same time, there was always lessons to be learned. So as Chris had mentioned, a couple of hours of questionnaire followed by a very handy and useful report about a week later was phenomenal. So firstly, as our 2 concluding charts here, firstly, as an attendee to today's session, we would like to offer up a no charge CRAT assessment to any of you. So if you could please reach out to us at R2i or any of your IBM colleagues, we would be more than delighted to help out in that regard. And just the final chart then is just to say again that we've learned a lot about today. We've learned about IBM flash system technology, safeguarded copy, the Cyber Vault blueprint and architecture. And we'd love to have a personalized session with each and every one of you, where we can get into a little bit more detail or talk specifics that it relates specifically to your organization. So again, we'll be in contact back with you about this, but please do take advantage of that offer from us here as well. This webinar is being recorded and should be on our website in about a week or so. And we will let you know when it is, in case you wanted to kind of re-watch it, or if perhaps you had colleagues that might be interested as well. And just to sort of as a bit of a tantalizing tease on the right side, we've created a variety of bundles, turnkey bundles with some implementation services that take advantage of some of the phenomenal IBM flash system technology, whether it be high capacity spinning disk, mid-level all-purpose flash, or perhaps some of the very high-end, high-performance NVMe-based flash. Tremendous price points that we could integrate into a cyber resilient environment for you. So please contact us about if you'd like to hear more about those as well. So I think with that, I don't know if Chris had any final closing comments, but otherwise, I would like to thank everyone for attending today. And just a minute over time, so pretty much on time. Thank you again for attending. We will be in touch, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.